Hey there. Thank you very much for joining today's webinar. My name is Corey O'Connor, Director of Product Marketing. And today I'm joined by Tim Davis, who is the head of our solutions engineering team. And we're excited to present today's webinar, which is on the topic of modernizing CASB to secure SaaS data. So let's go ahead and get started. One second while I share my screen. All right. Can you see my screen, Tim? Is that showing up?
Yeah. Yep, I got you.
Perfect. Awesome. All right. Again, thank you guys for joining. Let's roll right into it. But before we get into the actual topic, just wanted to level set and do a quick introduction to DoControl for those of you that are unfamiliar with the company. So DoControl was actually founded by former Google Cloud cybersecurity, the cloud governance, and quickly realized that there was a challenge within the platform in terms of securing SaaS data within the solution. So identified the challenge, certainly established a team of other co-founders, and that's how DoControl started. So we've been around for about 2 years. So we came out of the worldwide. We just raised our Series B funding, so we've got 45 million in the bank. We've got some amazing customer logos, which you can see represented on the slide there. Full channel partner program, lots of awards. Of course, we have our security and compliance frameworks we're up to snuff on. And that's it. So that's a little bit about DoControl for the uninformed. And let's kind of just roll right into it. First, we want to talk about the opportunity for DoControl as an emerging SaaS security vendor. So that when you look at an average organization today, you typically start with their identity provider, their IDP. You've got Okta, Google Workspace, OneLogin, Azure AD. So you start at the identity layer where you're assigning the appropriate permissions, entitlements, and privileges for each specific identity for those users to be able to be effective in their role. The next component is a solution that's going to connect or broker those users from the target systems and applications that they need to, again, be effective in their role, least privilege, right? So you have, Duo, Beyond Corp Enterprise, Perimeter 81, Kano Networks, Zero Trust Network Access, VPN-less solutions, right? Again, with the aim of providing a secure connection for those users. Now, once you get through those two pillars, you then have access to the systems, the applications that they need to do their job. Google Drive, O365, Slack, Salesforce, what have you. Now, there quickly becomes an issue in terms of unmanageable access and data overexposure, right? If you think about the average organization, they have hundreds of SaaS applications. Now, when you look at the number of users that are accessing those applications, you have a combination of internal users, you have contractors, third parties, you have partners that have access to these applications. And then the files within those applications are even larger, right? You could have tens to thousands to hundreds of thousands of files that are being accessed by this complicated environment of different identities. So you quickly have a data overexposure and unmanageable access problem as it relates to SaaS data. And that's the opportunity for us at DoControl, providing foundational data access controls for organizations that have a cloud-first strategy, right? Giving you what you need to secure your business so it can go faster, right? Most of these SaaS application providers are business enablement tools. And at DoControl, we're obviously focused on providing security so you can run your business effectively without slowing it down and make sure that all of your users and applications are secure. So that's the opportunity for DoControl. Now I'm going to pass it over to Tim to cover a couple of statistics.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. So first off, if we look at, what's the cost of, the average cost of data breaches out there today, right? And it's non-trivial anymore, right? Like losing data definitely costs you money. So, and if you think about, it's harder and harder to keep track of your data and where it is, because it's in, all kinds of different places that you don't have physical control over anymore. And, whether that's a SaaS application like a Microsoft 365 or Slack, whether it's something like Snowflake, whether it's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, right? Your data is all over the place, and keeping tabs on it and understanding where it is and who has access to it is way more than many people's full-time jobs, even for relatively small organizations. And that's not even thinking about very large organizations that are deployed across, national boundaries and things like that. So, and then not only that, when you take your users, as COVID has done, out of the workplace and out of those offices where at least your users were somewhat centralized, but now you've got this complete decentralization of your user base. Users are everywhere, working from anywhere. They're at the beach, they're at their home, they're at their ballpark, wherever they are, accessing information that you don't even see the path for in many cases, or maybe don't see the path for in many cases in terms of their network connection from their endpoint to wherever that data happens to reside. So there's a definite cost increase in the driven by the remote workforce, but there's a cost savings that goes along with implementing some of those zero trust solutions that Corey talked about a minute ago, right? So as he talked about, right, you pipe people through an identity platform and then through some kind of zero trust, and then they get access to a SaaS application or something like that. And so there's some savings and some risk mitigation that goes along with that, but there's also some penalty that you pay for that as well. So let's look at what are some approaches, the classical approaches to, how data has been secured in SaaS applications. And again, we're thinking about things like Microsoft 365, Slack, all the Microsoft platforms out there, Google Workspace, Salesforce, thinking about those types of traditional, software as a service, subscription-based platforms out there that hold your data and that your users have to use every day, at a lot of bandwidth to be productive, right? So the first approach that people have tried or the first one we're going to talk about today is inline scanning, break and inspect. Let's do some kind of proxy or firewall in the sky or some other approach where we're going to tear down that session, look inside everything that's going on, run it through a set of rules and a set of policies, and then put it all back together and then send it on to its destination, right? Here's this is essentially treating your SaaS application as though it's Secure Gateway. I would argue that there's a big difference between somebody going to some gambling site hosted in Russia versus them going to their OneDrive or Slack or something like that. First of all, thick clients might be involved in the OneDrive and Slack scenarios where, they wouldn't be in the other cases, right? Secondly, you might not have control of the device that people want to use. And I'm not just talking about bring your own device or letting users be flexible and work from mobile platforms and things like that. I'm talking about, you got third-party vendors, contractors that work for you. You've got business partners that you need to share files with, even sometimes very sensitive information. You need to share information with your accounting firms and auditor firms, particularly if you're, a public company. You've got to do those types of things. And so there's all these use cases that break and inspect just doesn't work for, besides the fact that, oh, by the way, your users are not going to enjoy break and inspect for when their data is going to cloud. If you think back to 2015, 2016, 2017, when Microsoft started pushing email out of the data center and into their cloud, and then SharePoint and OneDrive were not too far behind. What happened to your data center connection, right? The firewall, you had to scale up your firewalls tremendously and scale up your internet connections tremendously, because all that data that used to just sit in your data center that users were doing with emails and files now was going to the cloud. So that's the thing about with the break and inspect approach to software as a service is it just isn't made to handle that kind of throughput and bandwidth. It's made to do secure web gateway, not secure your SaaS. And so there's the user experience problem, and then just all the other things like the thick clients, large files. How long does it take you to scan a 40 meg Excel spreadsheet? It's going to take longer than it takes for you to update. So the inline process just doesn't really work for the SaaS. And so when people realized that, they said, well, hey, let's talk about the more traditional quote unquote CASB approach, and that's the using APIs. And how those APIs have typically worked is they scan through all the content that's there, and then they're looking for the needle in the haystack. So imagine it's the pre-Google days, and I hand you a sports almanac of baseball statistics, and I tell you, hey, I want to know what Hank Aaron's lifetime batting average was against I don't know, the Kansas City Royals. I don't know, but Hank Aaron maybe played Kansas City. I don't really know much about baseball, but anyway, what would you do? You wouldn't start on page 1 of this 1,000-page baseball almanac and read through all of it, and then to tell me that, hey, I found on page 437 that this was the answer to your question, right? No, you just go look up the answer, right? So what CASB APIs do is they start at page 1 of your SaaS application and go to page 1,000 and then go back to page 1 over and over again, looking for something interesting. It's the classic, they're searching for a needle in a haystack. And so it's really, really inefficient. And what really happens here is your mean time of exposure, which ultimately increases your risk, right? The longer your data is exposed publicly, the longer your data is shared with somebody it shouldn't be shared with, or accessible to somebody it shouldn't be accessible to, that increases your risk. And so the amount of time, hours, days, sometimes weeks that it can take to find something and do the corrective action is all time that you've got risk out there. So to try to mitigate that a little bit, they sort of tried to speed things up in the CASB space. And they said, well, what if instead of looking at and just trying to search through everything, what if we look at the event logs? This sped things up somewhat, but still there's still a lot of time lag there because these SaaS applications don't have an SLA on their event logs. So it might be a little faster. Again, this is a better approach definitely than the traditional way of doing it, but it's still going to have some significant lag. And it's fundamentally unpredictable. And when it's unpredictable, how do you manage the risk if you can't ultimately quantify it? So what DoControl has done is we said, hey, what if the event of something happening in the SaaS application is what we go off of, right? So rather than wait for something to happen, let's look at the event, and then now let's investigate from there. So let me give you an example. Somebody shares a file out of a SharePoint site. So now let's look right away at who shared that file. What did they share? What file did they share? What site did they share from? Who did they share it with? How did they share it? Let's look at all that information right then and there and decide based on all those parameters if we need to take action, right? This is going to be much faster. And it doesn't just have to be file sharing, right? This could be somebody makes a repository public in GitHub. It could be any action that happens in your SaaS application that can be the trigger that drives a measured and automated response to help you mitigate your risk in a very predictable, very time-conscious way, which ultimately, lets you free your users to use those SaaS applications and be able to turn on all the rich collaboration and sharing that they need to be able to do their jobs well and be productive from wherever they are without the penalty of your data being everywhere and you having no idea who has access to it. So that's the DoControl approach, and we'll look a bit more about that in a minute. Let me turn it back over to Corey, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about how we do what we do. Yeah,
thanks, Tim. So to your point, it's we always talk about least privilege, right? It's extending. We at DoControl we talk about extending the principle of least privilege to the SaaS application data layer, right? We want to give those users the appropriate access and be able to share and manipulate files with the users that they're partnering with, but we don't want to slow them down, right? So that's what we do at DoControl is extend least privilege to that SaaS application data layer. But back to CASB, right? So in the context of DoControl and what we provide. So there's no agents, there's no inline redirections, there's no slow API response times. And we highlight three specific key things that we provide. The first one, which you can see on the slide here, is visibility. We provide strong visibility across all the business critical SaaS applications that are being accessed by every identity, internal and external to your business. When you look at OAuth, third-party OAuth SaaS applications, we can understand which applications have been installed by which users. It also extends into unsanctioned applications, right? So of course we capture the ones that are approved by the IT team, but what happens if there's applications that slip through the cracks and they're unsanctioned and they're installed in the environment? You want to be able to identify that and remediate it, right? Visibility in general, we can expose potential data access risks and enable your security team to monitor all the SaaS user events and activities, both user and data activities, and take appropriate action, right? So we provide a combination of self-service and automated remediation, which is the next piece, protection. So in terms of self-service tooling, we call it quick action. If you identify an anomaly or an event that presents risk to your business, your team can immediately respond to it. They can change file ownership. They can change if the file is publicly accessible. You can take immediate action to threats that exist, right? But more importantly, we want to talk about DoControl security workflows. So this is automation, right? So we want to automate specific policies that are addressing use cases that are unique to our business, and that's the greatness of DoControl. And Tim touched on it, and we'll speak to it in the next slide. But we're a completely event-driven platform, so you can get extremely granular in the data access control policies that you want to establish and roll out throughout your SaaS environment, right? You've got a number of different SaaS applications, some of which might have similar functionality. You might be using Dropbox, Box, and Google Drive. DoControl allows you to enforce consistent policy throughout all three of those different applications. And the third piece, compliance. So we help provide support for different compliance and regulatory mandates, right? So you've got a lot of privacy regulations today, GDPRs, the California Privacy Act as well. Things like PCI DSS, right? Where you have credit card information or personal data that information, same with PHI as well, right? So Sarbanes-Oxley and others. And you might have internal policy. It's not just these pressures from industry regulations. You might have an organizational policy that dictates controls be put in place in front of specific users that are connecting to sensitive files and data, right? So we help provide support for those standards, for those internal compliance policy requirements as well. So yeah, what we're doing is we're trying to enable a strong security posture and avoid those steep financial penalties for non-compliance with, again, things like GDPR and others, right? How it works. So at a super high level, DoControl is a web application. So there's no software installations of any kind. You log into the DoControl service. As I mentioned before, it's completely event-driven. There's no, again, API redirections, no slow response times. It's completely event-driven. So what we do is we integrate with your business critical SaaS applications. We leverage the metadata sources and use those sources to expose every event within the environment. And from that exposure, security teams can then create very robust data access control policies. We call them security workflows to prevent data overexposure, right? The unmanageable data access that we talked about earlier on in the presentation, right? So you can see some of the sample applications. You know, we typically target the the most commonly leveraged apps that are critical to the business, right? So you've got Salesforce, Google Drive, Box, Dropbox, Slack, GitHub, etc. In addition to that, we integrate with your existing technology stack. So you have an IDP, you have an HR application, you have other security solutions that are installed, and we can hook into those solutions and add value. So from an IDP perspective, we have all of the groups and domains that are established within the IDP. So all you have to do is take what already exists within Okta or Azure AD, and then you can create policy in accordance to those groups and domains that present a higher level of risk, right? So folks maybe in the legal department or in the finance team, from the HR application side of things, let's say that you have employees that are resigning from the business. Anytime there's an employment status change, you can more closely monitor those employees that are leaving the business, because guess what? When people leave the business, they usually take files with them, right? This is one of the things, and Tim can speak to this, when we do POVs with customers, 99% of the time, there's always some former sales rep or former employee that still has access to sensitive files within their environment. And then in addition, SIM, SOAR, ITSM, we can hook into all of these solutions and add value to them, right? So you get three things: alerting, analytics, and security workflows. So we've got very customizable alerting. So you can create an alert or customize the alert based on risk. So if it's low, medium, or high, you can mute some of the alerts that do not present risk whatsoever to your business. So you don't want to inundate your security operations teams with false positives. So you can customize them to be alerts that present significant risk to the business. Analytics. So we do end user behavioral analytics as well. So we establish a baseline of what is considered to be standard, business activities. Anything that deviates from that baseline, we can report on. And that's pretty much it at a high level. And I'm going to turn things over to Tim, who's going to share his screen and do a solution demo.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Corey. So yeah, let's look at some of the things that we've talked about so far, and see. Let you kind of see some of these things in action. So I'm just going to start with a pretty basic workflow, and you might look at this and say, "Hey, Tim, that's a lot of boxes. This doesn't look basic." But let me walk you through what we're doing here, and I think you'll see this is a pretty straightforward use case, and this is a very common thing that where our customers will start in terms of helping them get control around their data that's in their SaaS application. So this is a specific workflow built around SharePoint, right? So very commonly, probably the most commonly, at least in the United States, deployed file sharing application in the cloud is the Microsoft suite with SharePoint. So what we're doing here is we're looking specifically for an event, and as Corey mentioned, we're all event driven. The event is that somebody has shared a file from a specific SharePoint site, the finance SharePoint site. Obviously, that's a place we're going to be very interested in. It's going to contain information that we want to very much keep an eye on and understand who has access to. By the way, we often start with the file sharing use case because it's one that people can relate to. But let me just mention real quick that we're really exposing the whole API, and not just of SharePoint or OneDrive, but applications like Slack, Zoom, GitHub, right? This whole API of each of these individual applications is actually exposed for you here. So you can, in a no-code way, write these security workflows around any event that's of interest to you that helps you manage your data, manage your risk within your SaaS application, right? So, file sharing is almost always where our customers and prospects start. It's almost never where they finish, right? Because there's so many other powerful things that you can do here. But let's just walk through this example of file sharing, because I think it's one that everybody can relate to. So again, user shares something from the finance SharePoint side. Now, again, this is SharePoint telling us that this has happened, right? We're not digging through the haystack looking for a needle. we're waving a giant magnet over the hay and the needle is coming to us, right? So much faster approach. And again, all about reducing that time of exposure and ultimately reducing your risk. So immediately when the user shares that file, we get the event. Then we're going to start asking some questions about what's going on here. So first of all, let's understand something about the user. Is this user a high-risk user? That can be defined a number of different ways. Maybe it's somebody who's turning their notice, they're about to leave your organization. So we're going to query an HR system and understand that. We can also query other systems that track relative risk of users, whether that's a UEBA tool, third-party UEBA tool, whether that's an endpoint tool. So it could even just be something as simple as, hey, this user's not in a group that should have access to this, right? So there's all kinds of ways you can define that. We can work through the details of that with you. But if we determine that this is a high-risk user, let's immediately undo what that user has done. So they shared a file. We're going to unshare that file, again, near instantaneous, reducing that time that your data is exposed. And then let's create a notification and we'll put information into a Teams or we can put that in Slack. We can create a ticket, however you want us to do that, right? So let's say, though, that this wasn't a high-risk user. We still want to understand more about what's going on. So now let's look at who did they share the file with. Did they share it with an untrusted domain, right? You have trusted domains, your organizations and businesses that you trust, that you do business with on a regular basis. You've got contractual agreements with them, whether that's your accountant, your auditor, you're somebody in your supply chain, right? These are business partners that you're working with. So if somebody's sharing a file with a trusted business partner, that's just normal business, right? It's interesting, we want to log it, but we're not going to try to stop that. So let's wait 30 days. So in this case, they've shared with that trusted domain. Let's wait 30 days. And then let's go ask that user, hey, user, do you still need that file shared? Maybe this was a project that was going on. The project's wrapping up. So they might say, no, I don't need that file shared anymore. So we're going to, again, send them a message via email, via Slack, via Teams, say, do you need that? Does this sharing need to continue? They say no. Then we clean it up, we move on. They say yes, we'll wait another 30 days, and we'll keep asking them until they say no or until they ignore the response, in which case we'll automatically clean up the sharing form. So nice thing about this, right? This is automated data hygiene. So you don't have to have your SaaS administrators or somebody else on your security team combing through these things and looking for how long something's been shared, and then proactively asking users or shutting sharing off and risking interfering with the business, right? This is letting the user tell us what's going on and managing the risk accordingly, and and now the security teams, this is all automated from the security team and the SaaS administrator's perspective. Let's say, though, that user did share with an untrusted domain. So maybe now we want to run a different approval model. So instead of asking the user, let's go ask the department head of that user's organization or that user's manager to approve that. And if they say yes, then we'll wait, and then we'll come back and ask them to continue approving it, right? Does this person still need access? If they say no, then we clean it up for you and remove the collaboration. So very straightforward use case. But the two things that are really key here is that, one, we're acting as soon as the event occurs, right? So limiting your risk by acting quickly. And then the second thing is that we can proportionally respond based on what's going on within this particular transaction. By the way, everything we've done here doesn't even involve looking at the contents of the file itself, right? We've just looked at metadata information around the file. So again, if this is that 40 meg Excel file where to do classic DLP on it, we're going to have to read through, every single cell of that, and it's going to take a while. Trust me, I've seen those solutions. I've worked with those solutions. It takes a while to scan a large Excel file. It's the worst case from a DLP perspective, right? So we've done all of this very fast without even having to look at the contents of the file. If you want us to look at the contents of the file and use that in our decision-making criteria for you, for what your response is going to be, we can absolutely do that. We have that capability as well. But you can do so much without actually having to look at the file itself. And a lot of times you can understand what the risk level is and quickly automate the response to that without even having to go full DLP in order to do so. And by the way, if you want us to look at things like data tags from Azure Information Protection, Titus, Bolden James, whatever, right? We have the capability to do that too. So if you're into data classification, that's something you've adopted, and you say, hey, can DoControl, help me manage my data that's been classified? Absolutely, we can take all of that into account as well. So this is the real advantage, is this automation that lets you do a proportional response based on the risk level. And of course, this is all automated, right? You always have the option to escalate to a human when you need to, and we can certainly, enable that for you as well. But what we found when talking with our customers is that so many of these use cases are very, cut and dry. And so they lend themselves well to automating a lot of these responses and then running approval models with the users, or maybe with other folks that are responsible within your organization, so that you can scale your security team and still manage your risk well. So that's just one example of what we can do. There's lots of others, and if you guys want to see more about that, reach out to us. We'll be happy to share more about what we can do and give you some some specific detail of some of those things. But if we kind of look to to kind of wrap things up here, if I was going to tell you about what makes DoControl different. So my background, I've been in the SASE space and CASB space for about 8 years now, which explains the gray hair, or in some cases lack of hair. So I've lived some of the nightmares and some of the challenges around cloud security. And what makes DoControl different? Why am I passionate about it? Why do I love talking about it? It's two things. It's how we integrate, right? We're not doing that inline that this involves you going out and installing agents on all your endpoints. And then, what do you do about the third-party people? Do you try to reverse proxy? Do you what do you do? It's a total mess, right? The way we deploy, we can solve for all of your use cases within your SaaS platforms without that UX penalty. And we can take care of those large files. We can take care of the thick clients and the other means of access that don't involve a browser. And we can easily expand to use cases beyond just that data loss risk approach. And then automating, like being able to customize that response, like I talked about, based on the threat level and based on your risk profiles, and being able to take in all the other information, other sources of threat intelligence that you already have in place to make sure that we're evaluating that accordingly. And then being able to scale your team through automation. And finally, and not trivially, giving you visibility across all of your different SaaS platforms, right? So you're not having to go to several different tools to understand, what's going on if you are investigating an incident, or just looking at, a normal hygiene of cleaning up your policies. Getting one piece of visibility across all those different major SaaS platforms where your key data resides. Again, a lot of value just in that, and that's the easy stuff. But the real exciting stuff comes in the workflows and security workflows and the automation pieces that we do, and how easy we make it for you to understand where all of your data is. So we'd be happy to tell you more. Reach out to us, and we'll be give you more information. Let me turn it back over to Corey to wrap things up for today.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And thank you all for taking the time to listen in on today's session. If you're interested in learning more, check us out, docontrol.io. We've got some other content on the site in regards to CASB and other solutions. Also, be sure to take a look at some of the upcoming webinars that we have planned within our Bright Talk channel. And that's it. Tim, again, thanks a lot today for presenting, and again, everyone that took the time to listen in. We appreciate it. Thanks again.
Thank you.